She is a known quantity in the pro bono legal arena and the nonprofit community, but she's less well known as a political entity. So we're going to get to know her a little better. We welcome to the program Leslie Jean-Bart. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
And we should note we have pretty much insisted our candidates be here in person. You are joining us remotely because you are a little under the weather. So thanks for joining us regardless.
Yes.
So I want to start with just talking a little bit about who you are as a person. We had you on last year in your role as president of the Black Democratic Caucus. We'll get into kind of what that was about a little bit later. But you're an attorney. You come
Mhm.
from a bit of a storied political family here in Jacksonville. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I'm a fifth generation Jacksonville native. And as you know, and many others know, my grandmother's Mary L. Singleton, first woman, first Black elected to the Jacksonville City Council. And she did later go on to serve in the legislature as well.
Yeah, and I mean, she is known for being one of two, really the two first women elected to city council, one of two Black women, the first in the 20th century. And um, she was, broke some boundaries there, but she also went on to run as lieutenant governor with
Yes.
Claude Kirk back in the day. So did that influence you somehow as a child? Did you glean from her any political instincts or aspirations?
Well, I would say yes. Probably at the time I didn't know I was doing that. So we pretty much always lived with my grandmother since I could remember. So when she was in Tallahassee, a lot of times my mom would be in Tallahassee with her, and then after a while, we actually moved to Tallahassee with her. And my mom passed away from breast cancer when I was 6. And at that time, my grandmother became the guardian for me and my sister. So after school, we would get picked up and just dropped off at the Capitol. It was the 70s. So you just drop a kid off and you just kind of let them run wild for a while. And I would sit in on legislative sessions and just because I thought it was fun. I mean, what else are you going to do when you're like 6, 7, 8 years old and you're at the Capitol? You just, you try to you just sit in and listen. So there's a part of that about watching government work that I'm sure had an impression on me, not to mention just the people who were surrounding my grandmother. She was always surrounded by people who were involved in politics. And so, whether I knew it or not, I saw her and how she related to others and how she got along with others.
And so
Yeah.
now you're angling to go back to the Capitol, not as a child and a spectator, but
Right.
as a grown-up and an elected official. And so talk to us about your district. We had
Okay.
your opponent on Monday, and we can talk about that as
Mhm.
well. But this district is a sort of west side, northwest side district, District 13. Describe to us who your constituents would be.
So, District 13 is a very interesting district because you do have Riverside, Avondale, and Murray Hill, some areas that are certainly seen as very historic. And then you have the Northwest side and the West side. And although it has sort of a different mix of people when you go to those different areas, it's still the same people who want the same things. So, even though it's a district that it frankly needs a lot. The median income is below the state average, but at the same time, it's got a lot of character. It's got some of the best parts of Jacksonville as far as I'm concerned. And so I'm excited to have the opportunity to represent such a diverse group of people.
Your role as an attorney has evolved over time. You're a double cane, we should say. You went to the University of
Yes.
Miami. You went there for undergrad. You got your law degree there. And your the law that you practice has evolved. Tell us how you began and what kind of legal work you do today.
So I started off in legal services and legal aid. I came home one summer and I interned at Jacksonville Area Legal Aid. While I was in school, I interned with Legal Services of Greater Miami as well as Legal Aid Society of Dade County. There are two down there. And then after I graduated, I started working at Legal Services of Greater Miami in the housing unit, helping people make sure that they were able to stay in safe and affordable housing. Once I was ready to come home, frankly, because my now husband was out of school and we were on the move, and we moved back here to Jacksonville. I had a great opportunity to work with the legendary Bill Shepherd. He basically said, look, come back to Jacksonville, and while you're looking for a job, you can work with me. And
And we
that
should say
ended up being a job.
he was a
Yeah.
civil rights known for kind of a civil rights work here in Jacksonville.
Yes. Yes. And so while I was with his office, I did the civil rights work. I never did criminal cases, which people find surprising because he's also known for his criminal work, right? But I did the civil rights cases, employment discrimination cases, education cases, cases like that. That's what I handled while I was with him. And then it progressed into a wonderful client who decided to tell her lawyer boss about me. And next thing you know, I'm doing personal injury as well as some of the civil rights. And here I am today, focused on personal injury and civil rights. So that's how I got here.
And so you've done a fair amount of pro bono work. You've also worked with activist groups. I think you define
Mhm.
yourself more as a community advocate than an activist, but what is your role? How do you see the work that you've done, and who have you worked with?
So, for me, it's just always been any way I could fit in. And so, with activist groups and advocate groups, anytime that I could see where I could help, I really wanted to lean in and help. I think a lot of the groups knew that if they needed somebody, a lawyer, to look at something, they could ask me, and I certainly would. I don't think I've ever really said no unless I was really just at my max and really knew that I couldn't help out. Otherwise, whenever some of the groups or just people just give me a ring, it's not something I necessarily probably, sought out to do. It's just was a natural progression of my community. Give back to the community. It was just happened that way.
Yeah. If you're just joining us, we are talking to Leslie Jean-Bart. She's a candidate for Florida House District 13. This is a election that is largely expected to be settled in the Democratic primary on Tuesday. You can join our conversation if you have a question or a comment for the candidate. You can call 904-549-2937 to reach us on air, or you can email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. We do have an email from Jim. He says, having read this candidate's background, I am impressed by her work in civil legal aid, providing free legal representation to people who cannot afford an attorney. May I ask what motivated her to do that, and how will it inform her governing?
Sometimes I don't always know why, because sometimes, there's not a grand scheme behind it. I just think it was a natural progression for me. I always tell people there's a reason why I do personal injury and civil rights, is because if I had to charge people up front, I would never make any money. So I think that I'm just inclined to want to help first. And legal aid and legal services allowed me to just kind of just throw myself in. I didn't have to worry about whether or not they could afford it. And it's sort of the same thing today, even with personal injury and civil rights. I don't have to worry whether or not my clients can afford my services. So I think it's just a natural progression, and I like helping people.
And so, in terms of how that would impact you as a leader, as an
Mhm.
elected official, does your work on behalf of people who've been injured or people who live in poverty, does that in any way drive your policy, your governing philosophy?
Oh, without a doubt, it certainly does. And so, when you actually see people going through sometimes what is the hardest thing that they've ever dealt with, you understand firsthand just how fragile life can be. You're out of work for 2 weeks, you miss that one paycheck, and everything gets derailed. People don't have savings. People's lives get turned upside down. What are they going to do next? So I think that puts me in touch with that, very much on a daily basis with my clients. And so I see the effect that the Florida laws have on people, not to mention as a lawyer, of course, I'm working with the laws that the legislature has given us, which is sometimes very difficult to do. And very often not designed to help everyday people. And so that will certainly influence how I look at legislation. I'll look at legislation on how it's going to affect everyday people, the people who need it most, the citizens, the constituents, because those are the people I'm in touch with on a more regular basis.
So I want to ask you about a couple of places that I could see potential sticking points with
Hmm.
some interest groups or even with other lawmakers. And
Hmm.
let's start with the fact that you're a trial lawyer. That's often a target of the legislature in terms of, where they think money's coming from, where they think influence is held. So as someone who works in personal injury law, are there do you find that any kind of fundamental friction that you would experience with your colleagues in Tallahassee were you to be elected?
I don't think so because, as a trial lawyer, and I'm very proud to be a trial lawyer, and I served on the board for the Florida Justice Association for 6 years, and that takes a lot of time and financial commitment to represent the statewide trial lawyers. And so, as far as I'm concerned, I don't see that as a sticking point. I see it as, I'm going to be someone who's informed. I know what these laws do, I know how they affect everyday practice. And it works both ways because, I can have practical conversations with those on the other side about what these laws really mean and what is really happening and who it's really affecting. They may think sometimes it's just affecting the trial lawyers, and that's just not true. It's affecting the people who are hurt, it's affecting doctors, it's affecting businesses. And so I think I have an insight that will certainly help to bridge that gap. I'm not an extremist by any means, so I can look at some laws and say, "Hey, what you're trying to do might work, but this is maybe how you need to do it to, to achieve your goal and to also be a law that's going to actually help."
In another area where you have also been out in front, we mentioned that you were on this program last year. That was as a representative of the Democratic Black Caucus. You were president, and you were concerned about text messages that had been sent among city council members during a meeting. You believed that they were violating the Sunshine Law. You asked both the state attorney and then the governor for an investigation. And in both cases, I don't think you got necessarily a response, but you were raising concerns that some might say would be personal in terms of the political consultant that was representing some of these city council members that you were critical of as possible, violators of the Sunshine Law, the fact that they shared that political consultant with the state attorney. So there was, I would say, a little bit of heated rhetoric, and I wonder about those relationships. So if you're looking to be elected and sent to Tallahassee to represent this area, how does that impact your ability to partner with those same people?
I think I have an interesting way about handling situations and people. And that was one situation where, first of all, I'm always going to call it like I see it. That was a violation of the Sunshine Law. I will never take that back. I think that that is the intellectual definition of a violation of the Sunshine Law. And it's a problem because accountability and transparency is very important. And I do think we should hold elected officials accountable, including myself. If I get in office, I believe I should be held accountable. And so I will always call it like I see it. Now, I think most people probably understand that it probably doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat when it comes to me. I there certainly are definitely times that I've gone in just as hard on Democrats when they do something wrong. So it's not a partisan view that I have on accountability and transparency. But as you also know, not too long after that, I represented a group on the East Side. And some of the same people who were involved in the Sunshine Law violation are people I partnered with to get legislation passed for the community benefits agreement. So even though that was a heated situation, by the time you find common ground with people, and when you find the common ground, you work with that. And if you're in elected office, you got to have a thick skin. And there are times that people might be offended by me, and I said, you know what, you're in elected office, you got to be able to get past this. And so I would be the same way. You got to get past the personal and get your job done. And ultimately we were able to do that with the community benefits agreement with the vote from council of 18-1. So I think I've shown that I can hold people accountable and still work with people at the same time.
One other area I wanna ask you about in
Mhm.
the same vein is your relationship the with police, with law
Mhm.
enforcement. You had a fairly public clash with the former head of the Fraternal Order of Police locally, then he went on to be the statewide leader, Steve Zona, on Facebook. This was after a protest where some people had been, um, yelling epithets at police. You were speaking out in support of their right to free speech, but it turned into a pretty, um,
Mhm.
well, heated back and
Yeah.
forth.
Yeah.
So that also came after the FOP. You had run for office back in 2015. They declined to endorse you. They endorsed your opponent, Kim Daniels, who continues to
Mhm.
serve in the legislature. And so, how would you view your relationship with law enforcement? And again, how does that past impact your ability to work with these partners if you're sent to Tallahassee?
So, one, I want to separate the fact that Steve Zona is Steve Zona, the FOP is FOP, and law enforcement is law enforcement, and they're not all the same thing. They're not the same group of people. The situation with Steve Zona was very heated, without a doubt, but I'm not the only person that he's had very heated exchanges with. And there are four other documented Black women that he has had very public disputes with. So, I would say one of us has a problem and it's not me. So, when it came to Steve Zona, it became personal and it really didn't need to be that. I woke up, I saw the protests, and I simply stated the law. The law is that you have a First Amendment right to say what the protesters were saying. I mean, that's a sacred right. He wanted me to condemn the individuals who were saying it. And first of all, who is he to tell me to condemn anybody? And I just wasn't going to do that to people who, frankly, had been thrown to the ground and were arrested, and it was a terrible scene. If you saw the videos, I wasn't. No one was going to tell me to condemn somebody for exercising their free speech. That was just absurd. And then it just sort of devolved into that. And he said I was upset because of the endorsement of Kim Daniels, and I pointed out that I don't know why that's something that he's bragging about. And so I just don't understand why it had to be what it was, but it was a very heated exchange. And then you have the Fraternal Order of Police as an institution. That institution has historically made it a little bit more difficult for police accountability. And, so is that a sticking point for me? Absolutely, because I believe in police accountability. Then you have law enforcement. That's your everyday people who are out there doing their job and doing it to the best of their ability. I don't have a problem with law enforcement. When I call 911, I want a law enforcement officer to come and I want them to do their job. I just also want them to make sure that they don't infringe on my rights or the rights of anybody else. I don't think that's too much to ask.
Very good. One issue that is going to be front and center for anybody who is sent to Tallahassee or who is currently in Tallahassee is this issue of the property tax amendment
Mhm.
that goes before voters in November. It would effectively remove property taxes via uh, this amendment. Ultimately, over a period of years, it essentially kind of
Mhm.
there's a provision to ultimately kind of get rid of it. And so municipalities are facing enormous challenges in terms of funding their budgets and their basic services. We've heard from a lot of local leaders about that concern. If this passes, and we should say it is polling most recently, I think a poll I saw over 70% likely to pass.
Yeah.
So what do you do with that as a lawmaker?
You try to do what should have been done before they put it on the ballot, which is try to make this more responsible. This was put on the ballot without a lot of public debate and input. And it's very irresponsible to put something like this on the ballot that, one, is going to certainly seem attractive to voters. It seems, yes, who wants to pay more taxes? Nobody. But they don't necessarily understand the circumstances and the consequences, because government has to work. Government has to be paid for. And it's not just what people think is the waste that's out there that's going to be cut. Services are going to be cut. road resurfacing, infrastructure, things like that. And once they realize that, and the government starts having to add on additional taxes here and there and fees here and there, and you know what? Guess who's going to be hit harder with a lot of those additional taxes and fees, especially if sales tax goes up? It's going to be people who can least afford an additional expense in their life, and that is low income and working families. And so it's sort of a bait and switch. This could have been done in a far more responsible manner. And even if it passes, I don't think it's too late for the legislature to act, to put something responsible on the next ballot that modifies this. Make it so that, sure, if you have paid off your house, then, maybe you shouldn't have to pay property taxes on it because now you own your house. And why should your house be taken away because maybe you can't afford to pay your taxes? That's pretty crazy. But there are ways to do this in a responsible way. And then there's the way that it was done this time. So, as a legislator, I think I would look at ways that we can, if this passes, to try to, minimize the harm that it's done.
I want to ask you about your opponent, Audrey Gibson. She was a
Mhm,
member of the House. She was a Senate Minority Leader for a number of years in the state Senate. She was on
mhm,
this program Monday, and um, at one point, we mentioned that you ran for office previously back in 2015. She was on
mhm.
your host committee. She endorsed you. I'm curious if you have had any kind of falling out with her, um, and and then, I mean, just your how you differentiate yourself from her as a candidate.
So I've certainly known Senator Gibson for most of my life. When I first moved back to Jacksonville, we had the Mary Singleton breakfast, and Senator Gibson was on that committee. That was before she held elected office, and I was just new coming to town and sort of watching and observing how the committee worked, and then later. Actually chaired the committee. So I've known Senator Gibson for a very long time, and I respect her record. You can look at her record and can see what she's done, and it's certainly admirable. And I will never take that away from her. This is a different time. 2026 is a very different government that we've got going on. It's a very different type of partisanship that we have going on. And District 13 has become a very liberal, progressive district. And I felt as if, that district deserved a very progressive voice and that voters deserved an option to see if they wanted someone who was more progressive to represent them in that district. And that's what led me to actually put my name in it and to run for office for this seat.
And she was on our program Mondays, we mentioned. We got a lot of feedback about that segment from people who thought that
Mhm.
she seemed sort of sluggish, but also disconnected from issues of the LGBTQ community. I wonder if you listened to that and your thoughts on it.
Yes, of course I listened to it, and of course I saw a lot of the discourse afterwards. And that question was surprising that she wasn't aware of it because I mean, I personally know people who've left the state. I know people who have family that are still here that they worry about a lot. And it's a very real fear about being part of the LGBTQ community and being in the state of Florida and the hostile laws that have been passed. And so she was in the legislature when some of these bills were passed. She voted against them. And so I don't want to insinuate that she is in any way against the community, but it was shocking that she wasn't aware of the impact those laws have continued to have on people.
I want to ask you about your representation in one particular case because I believe it's been um, important to you. The El Faro case, which was a cargo
Mm,
vessel that traveled between Jacksonville and Puerto Rico on a regular basis and was lost at sea during a storm. A number of lives lost in that case, and I believe you represented some of the families of the victims of the El Faro. Will you tell us how you got involved in that case and a little bit about just how it has impacted you?
So my firm became involved in the case when some families contacted. At the time, Ben Crump was working with Daryl Parks out of Tallahassee, and so some families
And
had
remind us who
contacted.
Daryl Parks is, please. And Ben Crump is a civil rights attorney who's fairly well known nationally.
Yes, and Daryl Parks was his law partner in Tallahassee, also civil rights attorney and personal injury attorney. And so they contacted our firm to co-counsel the case with them. So that's how I got involved in the case. Right away to meet up with the family, and it was a very emotional type of representation because we were dealing with a lot very fast, and we had several families who were going through the unimaginable, not knowing what happened to their family, finding out more about what happened to their family, and then getting answers, and ultimately getting some legislation that was passed in Congress to hopefully help prevent incidents like this from happening at sea. So it was definitely a very emotional um, case to deal with. But working with those families was truly an honor. All of those families were incredible people who were incredibly strong during a very difficult time. And so it was definitely an honor to work with them.
Your number one legislative priority if you are elected?
Number one. So um, that's hard because I have a lot, but I would probably say um, the thing that, of course, I think is um, more of a massive undertaking. So it would be a priority from day one because it might not happen on day one, but I'm going to get it. I'm going to get it done. Is I want us to look at public education not as how we keep patching things here or there, but how we can really reform public education, how we can start at an earlier age. Kids need to start school earlier. And then by the time they graduate, I want them to graduate with more than just a piece of paper, and then they have to go on to do something else in order for that paper to mean something. I want kids to graduate from high school and be able to really go out into the real world and make a living wage. And so I think that requires sitting down and taking a look at public education the way it is right now and saying just because we've always done something one way doesn't mean that we have to continue to do it that way. Let's look at this about what's happening in the world today and how we can best prepare kids to be responsible, independent adults by the time they get out of high school. So that would be my biggest, effort that I want to start on day one.
Well, Leslie Jean-Bart, she is the Democratic candidate for Florida House District 13. That primary is on Tuesday. Leslie Jean-Bart, thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks, Ann. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
For sure. Up next, Paul Renner earns praise but no endorsement from the current governor.